I'd like you to meet my cousin Stanley.
We're related.
There's 2 of them?
Ever since my ranking of the Disney live-action remakes, I've had a fair number of people asking me a simple little question. Are you gonna rank the direct-to-home video sequels? And every time they ask, I say, I don't know. I mean, it does sound like a fun thing to do, but it would be really difficult to do one that would be able to stand out. So many people have ranked and ranted about these movies at this point, and with a certain crabman getting to the idea before I could, again, me ranking the direct-to-VHS and DVD sequels from the 90s and 2000s would probably be a little dour. But it seems to be something people love to remind me of because since my top 10 worst animated sequels video, people have brought the topic up to me some more. I kept holding it off until finally, I came up with a rather interesting idea. I may not be able to rank the movies themselves, but what if I tried ranking them in a different way, by talking about one specific element most of these movies share. The villains. We all like Disney villains. In most cases, they end up being the best parts of the movie with their outlandish personalities and the surprisingly evil extent of their actions. But let's face it, that's not something we can say for most of the sequel villains. Most of them lack the charm, intimidation, menace, and fun personalities of the original villains. And at the worst of times, they end up being the worst part of the movie, whether it's because they're boring, incredibly stupid, pathetic, or some combination of all three. The villains of Disney's direct-to-home entertainment sequels can certainly suck, but what if there might be some good ones? Villains that deserve an honorable mention for being entertaining, intimidating, funny, and diabolical, even if they're not as good as the villain from the first one. But hey, why stop there? It would be incredibly predictable to only talk about the direct-to-home entertainment sequels. So what if we try spicing things up by including the theatrical sequels too? That's right, we're not just gonna talk about Hunchback 2 and Lion King 2. We're gonna talk about Moana 2, Wreck-It Ralph 2, and Frozen 2, even Zootopia 2, to celebrate Disney's first not-crappy movie since Encanto. Yay! There's surprisingly a lot of villains to go over, so we got a long list ahead of us. But before we start, I should probably mention some rules. Not all of these sequels have what would be considered a villain, so if a certain movie is missing from here, it's because they didn't make the cut. For example, Dixie from The Fox and the Hound 2 is certainly the antagonist, but she's not really a villain. It would just be weird to put her in the same basket as Paubert or Buster. And like before, I'm gonna go with one villain per movie. It would probably be redundant to include both Sira and Nuka on this list for obvious reasons. Also, I thought about whether or not to include certain movies in this lineup if they act as a pilot for a TV show. And after thinking about it, I figured I could give it a shot, but only if they count as an actual follow-up to the events of the original movie. So I won't be including Zurg from Buzz Lightyear of Star Command, as it's more of a spin-off and not an actual follow-up to Toy Story. Finally, I'm strictly covering the sequels of the main animated canon, none of the Pixar movies. I think it would be better to focus on the main Disney villains since the Pixar ones were technically done by a separate team. So with all that said, let's get this ranking started. Which Disney sequel villains reign at the top while the others fall flat? Let's find out.
Nothing! Absolutely nothing!
Frozen 2 was such an unnecessary movie. It was just a big heaping pile of nothing, with a lame plot, all of the characters being pretty much the same but less funny, terrible plot structure with an overemphasis on lore, just an hour and a half of nothing. And nowhere was that more evident than by its villain, Elsa's long-dead grandfather who never even appears in the present day. The gimmick is that he's supposed to be capable of influencing the events of the story despite not existing in the present day, but that doesn't make for an interesting villain. He only appears in flashbacks talking about how he doesn't like magic because people can use it to deceive him. That's it. There's no basis for him. It's just an idea they wanted to tease you with before putting it to the wayside. He's not even a character in the film, just a tool. And because he's already dead before the events of the plot, we never get to develop him beyond just what we see in flashbacks. He is such a non-element in the movie that he barely even counts for this video. He has no personality, no menace, no presence, no relationship with any of the other characters, no anything. It is actually impossible for me to rank him above any other villain on this list. Maybe if the movie did more to set him up and flesh out his backstory, it could have been something worth talking about. But it was as well thought out and planned out as, well, anything in this movie really. Seriously, I had to look up this movie's wiki just to get the name of this guy. King Runard. When your villain is so forgettable and so non-existent that I have to look up the wiki to remind me of their name, that's really not a good sign. He's just a nothing villain with nothing to delve into. At least with the other villains, they give me something to work with, even if most of them suck. And for that, King something or whatever takes the crown for worst Disney sequel villain no contest. Please just let the next ones be more worthy of my time.
You Mongolian! Don't you break down my wall!
I mean, I kinda have to talk about the Mongolians, right? I mean, who else am I gonna talk about? Those random-ass bandits who are only in the movie for 1 minute of screen time just to get beaten up? We're told throughout the movie that they're threatening to destroy China and how important it is that they form an alliance to stop the invasion. Yet they never make an appearance throughout the film. It's pretty much the same thing as King What's-His-Face. The Mongolians have nothing to talk about, seeing as how they're not, you know, a character in the narrative, no personality, no menace, no relationship with any of the other characters, just a cog for the movie's conflict to work off of. I guess to be fair, they are more effective than King Who Gives a Shit. They're a looming presence throughout the story with how they keep being brought up as a pending threat to China. They're still alive in the present day, so they're at least part of the story in some way. And I guess there's also the fact that there was no alliance at the end because Mulan thinks true love and following your heart was more important than, you know, saving millions of people from dying. So I guess the Mongolians succeeded in invading China and killing everyone, making them the only sequel villains who actually end up winning, I suppose. It probably happened off screen so they can keep that G rating. Still, there's really nothing to talk about here. Just a lame background element that serves as a tool to force in a conflict somewhere. But with how horrible of a sequel Mulan 2 was, maybe it's best they ended up winning and put this franchise to an end. No more Mulan, no more garbage sequels.
Wait! I think your recharger might have a virus!
There's a part of me that really wants to call Ralph the villain of this movie because of how much of a douche he ends up being, but I guess Arthur the Virus will have to be the next best thing. Yet another villain who's just a tool instead of an actual character. All he really does is infect the internet space with a virus personalized from Ralph's obsession with Penelope. But hey, at least he actually makes an appearance in the movie, and he has actual honest-to-God screen time, right? Not as bad as these two nobodies, right? Well, whoop-de-shit. Being a better villain than the bottom two entries on this list isn't exactly worthy of praise. And even with that screen time, it's a horribly rushed and forced part of the movie. Arthur only appears in the last 40 minutes, and he's defeated after only being in the movie for 20 minutes. He's so inconsequential in the grander plot that he might as well not even be here. I guess technically you can say Double Ben is more of the actual villain, because he's the one who makes the viruses and sells them to people, but in that case I would have even less to say. Arthur is the only one I can actually bring up, and even then he's such a non-villain. And the way he's defeated with that dumb speech in the end just makes him even more pathetic in context. It practically feels like a waste of time just talking about him. Just another waste of a villain that has nothing noteworthy. Honestly, I would prefer if this was like Mulan 2 and he succeeded in destroying everything off screen, because the thought of another terrible villain from this series is too much for me to bear.
Fighter pilot!
I was really on the fence as to whether or not I should include Tarzan and Jane in this list, especially after I looked more into it. It wasn't even a movie. It was a lame advertisement for the TV show with 3 episodes lazily tied together, only barely filling in the actual plot of Jane setting up an anniversary surprise for Tarzan. But technically it's advertised as a sequel, so fuck me, I guess we're doing this. Like, which of these villains is even worthy of discussion? Nuru and Sheeta are just a dollar store knockoff of Sabor the Leopard. None of the menace or intimidation factor. They don't stack up against any of the other sequel villains for obvious reasons. Those 2 asshole diamond hunters don't fare much better. They're just a bunch of assholes who want to get rich off diamonds. Bland personalities, and they don't do anything to leave a memorable impression. The only other villain in this quote-unquote movie is Robert Candler, an old friend of Jane who ends up becoming a double agent against the British. I guess out of all these villains he's the closest to an actual character with an arc, but that's honestly not saying much. Because of how this story was crammed into a 20-minute time slot, there isn't that much time for him to develop as a villain. They barely develop his relationship with Jane. By the time they get to the reveal that he's a spy, it's so tacked on and out of nowhere that it doesn't have an impact. Hey, I guess that makes him the OG Disney twist villain. Haha, well it still sucks. He lacks any sense of charm, so the reveal that he's a villain isn't a surprise. He doesn't do anything memorable during his time as a villain, and his heel-face realization comes completely out of left field, so his attempt at a redemption arc doesn't feel earned. Strangely enough, the TV show itself isn't actually that bad. It has a lot of interesting storylines and villains for Tarzan to battle. So what exactly happened here? Did they just pick the 3 worst episodes to advertise the show? Or was this their attempt at greenlighting a second season that ended in failure? Well, I guess it had to be the latter because this was literally the series finale of the Tarzan saga. If they really wanted to advertise the show, the least they could have done was use an episode with a more interesting villain. But nope, all we get is this douchebag. No engaging personality or wit whatsoever.
It should have been me, not him! It's not fair!
What fucking moron thought it was a good idea to have a fake-out death in Ariel's beginning? They really wanted to convince us that Ariel was gonna die at the end of this prequel movie? I am so thankful that these horrific sequels ended here, because a fake-out death of the main character everyone knows lives on in the next movie is where everyone should be drawing the line. Oh wait, sorry, I'm supposed to be talking about the villain. I guess I was just trying to avoid talking about her because I would much rather talk about anything else in this garbage. Marina Del Rey is such a waste of screen time. She has no relationship with Ariel or any of her sisters. She barely has a relationship with Triton. Her actual beef is with Sebastian for being the king's attaché and wanting his job. Like, why? Why do you want to be Triton's right-hand man if you don't even like him? It's not like he treats you with any sort of respect. Is the pay good? Do you get any special treatment? Because Sebastian is never shown to get any and is even arrested on the spot for breaking the no music in the kingdom law. Maybe we're supposed to feel bad that she feels trapped in a job and work environment she hates? That doesn't sound so bad. But oh no, suddenly she decides to kill Ariel and Sebastian, otherwise she'll lose her shitty job. Like, why am I supposed to feel bad for her again? Just quit? Work as a store clerk or something? If she was in it for the power, that element of her character was never built up or foreshadowed. She was never a power-hungry witch like Ursula before this moment. She just suddenly displays those characteristics out of nowhere. And really, what power did you even get after obtaining this position? Certainly nothing worthwhile because your power was immediately overwritten by Triton. Seriously, why do you want this job? You don't benefit from having it at all. She's not nefarious, she's not diabolical, she's not ruthless, or any of the things that made Ursula such an iconic villain. She's just there because the writers thought this prequel about lifting the ban on music needed a villain. She's just so boring, and they try way too hard to make her stand out with all these wacky facial expressions. And her being the final villain of these terrible sequels just makes her terrible impression even more terrible. This trend really didn't go out with a bang, but instead on a whimper.
I could kiss me, but I'd fall in love.
You idiots!
A lot of people act like Sarouche is the best part of the dogshit of Notre Dame too. And he is. But that doesn't make him a good villain. I get that a lot of people like this guy, but I don't. He just sucks. Oh man, he is such a pathetic joke. Maybe it's from him coming off the heels of the best villain in Disney's animated canon, but Sarouche is such a cringe, annoying, unamusing, unthreatening trout. All he does is talk about how much he loves himself and how much he loves stealing jewels. That's it. There's nothing else to him. He doesn't have a complex relationship with Madeline, he doesn't do anything nefarious or sinister, and he's defeated in the most pathetic way I have ever seen a villain being defeated in any of these sequels. Maybe it wouldn't have been so bad if the movie was in on the joke, like everyone knows this guy is a pathetic piece of shit, and the writers are constantly taking shots at him, but they actually try to make him out to be this worthy adversary and a sinister criminal mastermind who's a real threat, and they fail so badly. The only reason he comes close to accomplishing anything in this movie is because of how fucking stupid everyone around him is. Like they had to take all the characters and deliberately reduce their IQ to give this guy a snowball's chance at winning. I can see why people would get some ironic enjoyment from this guy, so I decided to be generous and rank him a bit higher than I normally would, but as a villain, he is just straight up awful. Even if we didn't compare him to Frollo, he's painfully boring with a crappy design and all of his dialogue is insufferable. He's a completely incompetent and inept antagonist. And a Disney movie, even a direct-to-home video sequel, deserves to have a villain that's more entertaining and diabolical. Maybe if he spent less time wanting to blow himself and more time actually being a good villain, he would have placed higher. But as is, he is simply a giant disappointment.
He's supposed to be dead!
Yeah, weird.
In Cinderella 2 Dreams Come True, Lady Tremaine could count as the main villain as she does appear in the movie as an obstacle against the characters, but since I'll be talking about her later in a much better sequel, I figured it would be redundant to talk about her here. So for this spot I'll be talking about Lucifer instead. Yeah, that cat who should have died at the end of the first movie. I don't care about cats landing on their feet or having 9 lives or whatever. A fall from that height should have killed him. Anyway, he's not as annoying as Sarouche, I'll give him that, but with that said, he's still another nothing villain. All he really does is chase after the mice while being subjected to slapstick comedy. Not exactly in the highs of Disney's villainy. There's this one storyline where he falls in love with the girl cat and he gets the mice to help him out, but then they turn on the mice and chase them, and when that doesn't work out, the girl cat doesn't like him anymore, and then he just gets bonked on the head. That's Lucifer in this movie. There's honestly nothing I can really go into because its presence in the movie is so minimal and inconsequential. Like something you could have easily cut out and you would lose nothing. Anyway, this movie sucked and Lucifer sucked. Can one of these movies just please give me a villain with more than 2 paragraphs of content to talk about?
And your name is? I'm Thor. You're Thor? Well, it hurts.
Oh boy, another sequel that's just a shitty pilot for a failed TV show. Which villain could I possibly choose from? The boring one with nothing to talk about, the boring one with nothing to talk about, or the boring one with nothing to talk about? You can tell they put a lot of diversity into these villains, it's so hard to choose. Anyway, the guy pretending to be Odin is the closest thing to an actual character, so I guess we're going with him. Eric Hellstrom is barely a villain worth noting. His backstory is pretty rushed and not fleshed out, and his time on screen is rather unremarkable. On a basic level, I like the idea for a villain. A man who tragically lost everything in the stock market crash and underwent a psychological rewrite of his brain to cope with what happened, and he develops an alter ego based on the Norse god he had a fascination for. Unfortunately, the movie doesn't really do much of anything with this idea. Once again, this is a villain who had to work with 20 minutes of story because of how the movie was an advert for a failed TV show, which means they don't have enough time to develop him as a villain, so there's nothing to his character beyond he's some dude who went mad with power. Heck, he's barely on screen for 10 minutes of that 20-minute runtime, so they can't even focus on the tragedy of his psychotic meltdown. He's just some guy who wants to take over the world, and also he thinks he's Odin. It's a good idea, but one that isn't fully realized, leaving me with hardly anything worth talking about. Again. God, are all the sequel villains gonna be this one-note and boring?
Somehow returned.
The one that started it all, and the one that to this day leaves a sour taste in my mouth. Maybe back in the 90s it sounded like a really cool idea. Jafar was an amazing villain, and hearing about him striking back for an epic rematch with Aladdin sounded like a really good idea for a movie. And then the movie came out, and it was shit. And so was its use of Jafar. In terms of personality and menace, it's pretty much the same thing except less funny and entertaining. He does get one good scene, which is ironically the song number when he goes up against Genie. It shows how he's managed to turn the tables by fully harnessing the potential of a genie's powers and using it to outmatch him. It's basically him singing about what he used to be next to the genie. Second rate. Now he's projecting that on Genie as he gets the best of him. It's a surprisingly fun bit in an otherwise terrible sequel, but that's where my praises for him end. He is such an idiot who squanders his power on a stupid revenge scheme instead of just getting rid of the heroes outright. You have phenomenal cosmic powers. There is literally nothing stopping you. Just blast them to smithereens and be done with it instead of this convoluted revenge scheme. What, the genies can't kill rule? Well then just imprison them somewhere. Wouldn't it be a fate worse than death that they eventually starve or succumb to madness? The vibe he gives throughout the movie is so boring and underwhelming because he's just the same character. He doesn't go through any new growths or development. He's just here for revenge against Aladdin. Like, imagine the potential he could have had if they actually went all out. Really think about how Jafar would actually feel in the sequel. He was mocked and forgotten by everyone. His sidekick and only friend abandoned him. He was replaced by a street rat, and after years of service his power was stripped from him. He should be pissed. Like he's really hell-bent on destroying Agrabah in retaliation for his fall from grace. It would have made his presence so much more intimidating if he was this enraged genie. But nope, he's just a trollish, pompous, power-hungry jackass like before. I respect the voice actor for at least trying, as he does a really good job reprising his role, but the character itself is a disappointing mess. If only there was a sequel that actually managed to grasp what made the original villain fun while expanding on their character.
Ursula's crazy sister!
What was the point of this? Like seriously, what was the purpose of this character? She's just Ursula. Again. She's slightly less crazy and over the top, but it's really just a dollar store version of what we already got in the original. I already hate the idea that Ursula had a sister to begin with because you'd think she would have brought her up at some point if they were both so close and hated Triton so much. They were too lazy to come up with a more creative conflict and just said, let's just introduce a shocking twist about Ursula having a sister. Yeah, sure. And number 4 is the long-lost nephew of the Toiletator. What a shocker. Her design is also really weird. I just can't take her seriously when she has lips that look like they were stung by a bunch of bees, and a hairstyle that looks like she's going Super Saiyan. She's surprisingly incompetent too. Both times she's about to get the Triton, she's overpowered by the stupidest stuff you can think of. First she puts herself in a really vulnerable position and just allows Ariel to hit her with the ship mass. And then she just allows herself to get distracted by a bird, causing her to lose her grip on Ariel or some shit. You'd think that Ursula's crazy sister would be more powerful and more difficult to outwit, but no. She's actually tricked and defeated pretty easily. Even after getting the Triton, she doesn't do anything spectacular with its power like Ursula did. She just causes a small storm and makes some ice stick out from the ground. And the only reason she gets that far to begin with is because of how stupid everyone was to not tell Melody ahead of time that, hey, there's a crazy lady after you, so don't trust her. It's another example of the heroes artificially having their IQ lowered in order to make the villain's plan even marginally capable of succeeding. Because if they just told Melody the truth instead of hiding it from her, this movie's plot wouldn't have even happened. But even putting all that aside, she's just so boring and unamusing. She's Ursula, except none of the stuff that made Ursula entertaining. She's less psychotic, less funny, less wicked, less clever. No wonder no one talked about her before this movie because she's such a boring and inferior clone of the original. Morgana could have been a little bit better if they bothered to do something different with her, like anything at all. All she does is remind the viewer of a much better movie they could be watching right now. No, not that one.
Somehow,
Ratcliffe
returned.
If you're familiar with my previous video, then you already know that I do not hold Pocahontas in any positive regard, going over almost every single horrible thing about it. In fact, the only thing I didn't go over was how shitty of a villain Ratcliffe was. Just an asshole gold digger who wants money. And I bet you're asking the same question as me. Is he any better in the sequel? Well, he has more motivation than just gold, but he's still pretty shitty. He's really generic and one-dimensional in personality and charisma, and he only accomplishes anything because the king is an easily persuaded dick. He's slightly more competent than Morgana, but he's still defeated in the dumbest way given his situation. He just kicks John Smith off a cliff instead of, I don't know, shooting him, not even checking to make sure he's actually dead. It's like the oldest cliche in the book. And in the final battle, his entire armada is defeated by the trio when there's several ways around this problem. Don't these people have any guns? You were just getting ready to conquer the natives and you didn't pack a single firearm? Oh, but don't worry, Ratcliffe does take out a gun to shoot them, only to go on a retarded monologue that gives the heroes enough time to, I don't know, knock him off the boat? Also, if Ratcliffe always carries a pistol with him, why didn't he just shoot John during the prologue? Seriously, it's the easiest shit in the world. Pull out your gun, shoot him in the face, and the rest of the plot doesn't happen. You win. Fucking idiot. I suppose you can argue that they tried a little bit more with him in this movie, but that's really not saying much. He has more of a relationship with Pocahontas compared to the last film, so there's some sort of connection between the hero and the villain, but it never goes anywhere noteworthy. I mean, come on, people. It's fucking Ratcliffe from Pocahontas. Him being the main villain in the sequel is just as boring and unsatisfying as it sounds. You might as well just replace him with a tap-dancing, juggling panda, because it would have been just as effective as this boring, unentertaining, ugly, mustache-wearing dog turd.
They call her the cat lady.
Much like what happened with Kronk, there was just something about this sequel that completely sucked all the funny out of Yzma. I mean, it should come as no surprise since this movie has different writers and directors, but come on, it's Yzma, and she's interacting with Kronk in this movie. The comedy practically writes itself. How do you even begin to fuck that up? She is one of the most outrageous, entertaining, funny, outgoing, and theatrical villains in Disney's Rogues Gallery, and turning her into such a boring, dry, pale, sacrilegious imitation of her film counterpart in this painfully boring and forgettable sequel should be a criminal offense. It's just three dumbass stories lazily tied together, only this time they don't have the excuse that it was a pilot for a TV show, so they should have had more quality writing to work with. But Yzma in this movie is so painfully extra. She has this really bad song number that feels like it's going on for way too long. The lyrics are dumb, the rhythm is cheap, and it doesn't make the most out of her the kid's singing capabilities. It's not the next Snuff Out the Light, not even close. It's like 100 tiers below that song. Her diabolical plan doesn't even make sense here, and it feels like a really insulting step down from how diabolical she was in the original. Instead of something more fitting for her character like trying to get revenge on Kuzco and Pacha, now she wants to scam old people with a fake youth potion. What? Since when was money her motivation? What, did Ratcliffe take over her brain or something? And not to mention how fast and easily her plan was thwarted, so she wasn't even a threat in this movie. Seriously? She was more threatening in The Emperor's New School. Most of her comedy just comes from rehashing jokes from the first movie, and yeah, like I said earlier, different writers and directors so they don't work. I guess to be fair, she gives me a lot more to work with and talk about compared to a lot of other villains on this list, but it doesn't make up for how badly her character is mishandled in this movie. Yzma is just inconsequential and boring, and those are not things that should be associated with her. It just feels insulting that her character and Eartha Kitt's talent were completely wasted here. So this one may be a little unfair because, to be honest, it's really not that hard to be a better villain than Clayton. He does have some charisma and a few interesting interactions with Tarzan, but ultimately he's not exactly in the top tier of Disney's Rogues Gallery. He's more or less just a generic poacher guy with nothing else to his character. But I will give Clayton this. At least he's not Mama Gunda. While she is more imposing compared to most of the villains I've talked about so far, Tarzan 2 doesn't really do much with her because of how unfocused the movie is. There's so many different storylines going on and it barely does anything to properly resolve them. And that's most evident by how the story handles her and her kids. The most villainous thing they do is just rough up Sugor's house. And there isn't much to her personality either. She just acts mean and messes with the main characters while reprimanding her kids. Very little happens during her screen time, which just makes her really boring as a character. She does have a few fun funny interactions with her sons, but they're really not among the highs of Disney's comedy. They try to give them a backstory about how they were outcasted by other herds, but it's played off as a comedic moment so you don't take it seriously. Even during the third act when she's supposed to be more menacing, it's more played off as a joke instead of making her a traditional villain. And the way she's defeated is so rushed and stupid that it completely confirms how she and her sons were a waste of time. She fights with Sugor and he randomly compliments her eyes, and for some reason that makes them fall in love. No, I'm not kidding. That's the solution to the conflict. It is the most outrageous and convoluted way they could have resolved the situation, and I actually feel like I got stupider watching it. I'd still take Mama Gunda over every villain ranked below her, but she's such a boring villain with the dumbest defeat I've ever seen. I really hope that after this I'll be talking about much better ones, and hopefully they won't be defeated in such cringe-inducing ways. Ugh. Hamsterville is one of those sequel villains you probably don't think about in spite of them constantly shoving him in your face. Like, he appears everywhere. The movies, the TV series, the anime. This is supposed to be the big bad of Lilo and Stitch. If only they made him a better villain. All he does is scream and shout at others to do his dirty work for him. And let's just say it gets pretty annoying after the first 3 minutes. It's pretty much a running gag that he's so small and unimposing that the only way he's able to do anything is if he has a henchman willing to put up with his shit. Which in a sense does make his constant failures amusing to watch. It's like what I wanted for Sarouche, where the writers are constantly taking shots at how pathetic he is. Everyone is constantly misspeciesing him, he needs someone to make a footstool for him to face his enemies, and without someone to back him up he's easily defeated. He does get more menacing in Leroy and Stitch after catching all the experiments, but it takes forever for him to get to that point. You have to understand. I watch both the movies and TV series for context behind this character, and there's really not that much to him except for 3 gimmicks the other characters make fun of. All of these things make him an okay character. It is fun seeing him being a punching bag for the rest of the cast, but he sucks as a villain because he never becomes a serious threat on his own. He comes across as more of a silly sidekick you see the main villain hanging out with instead of an actual villain, but he is a bit entertaining, so I decided to rank him a bit higher. Outside of the constant nagging in that ear-grating voice, there's actually quite a few good jokes being used with his character, but in order to rank higher they have to be a villain that's both funny and threatening. Hopefully we'll find one as we get further into this ranking. With that said, Hamsterville is okay for what he is. A pathetic villain, but he's always good for a laugh. Seriously? I cannot be the only one who noticed this about Buster throughout Lady and the Tramp 2. He spends so much of his screen time praising and trying to get the approval of an underage girl, and he directly refers to her as his girl multiple times. Even Scamp says it in a way that's concerningly implying something. Okay, well, maybe it's a surrogate daughter thing where he takes her in as a father figure. But then at one point he refers to her as Angel Cakes. But why? Why would you say that? Buster, please just answer me this question. Are you a pedophile? Please just tell me. I need to know how uncomfortable I'm supposed to feel while watching your scenes. Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to be talking about him as a villain. Sorry, I guess I got a little distracted. Though I'm pretty sure that in itself is an act of villainy. Buster is pretty much the same as Hamsterville in that he's just okay, but for different reasons. He's actually surprisingly diabolical, coming up with this really twisted revenge plan to get back at Tramp for ditching him. Oh, okay, so he's gonna tear his family apart by ripping Scamp away from them and turning him into a junkyard dog. Yeah, sure, I guess that sounds about right. Actually, no. He sets Scamp up to get caught by the dog catcher and hauled over to the pound, where he's gonna get mauled to death by a rabid stray dog. Holy fuck. That is a major step up in villainy compared to the other villains I talked about so far. And it's actually quite a surprise, seeing as how there was no way you would guess that was his diabolical plan the whole time. But aside from that, he's a pretty by-the-numbers villain. You get the sense of betrayal surrounding his character. Every time he talks about Tramp and how he left him behind, his feelings about it feel sincere. It's also pretty interesting how he plays off Scamp's naivety and takes advantage of it as part of his plan. But his personality is really blunt and generic. There's also the issue of him being that type of sequel character. The one who apparently one of the characters knew about the whole time and was an important figure in their lives, yet they were never brought up or mentioned in the original, especially when it's never explained when the falling out between Buster and Tramp happened. It makes his existence into a really distracting paradox because you know it's something that doesn't properly fit into the story. But still, I will admit he was more engaging than I expected him to be, especially when compared to villains ranked below him on this list. He certainly could have been explained in the plot better, and he definitely could have done without, you know, that. But overall, he's one of the more serviceable sequel villains. It's not much, but at least it's a start. But seriously, get CPS on his ass.
Hocus pocus, I'm a bat!
If you thought I was gonna talk about that shitty Thanos wannabe who only appears for 2 minutes at the end of Moana 2, I'm sorry to disappoint you. Nope, instead I'm gonna talk about the villain who's an actual character in the movie, Matangi. Yeah, it's no surprise that this movie was garbage, but I have to admit she was pretty entertaining. In a sense, it's a bit debatable as to whether or not she's really a villain given her ulterior motives, but that would mean I have to talk about the shitty Thanos wannabe, and I really don't want to do that. Her design is admittedly pretty generic considering the way the movie was building up her dramatic reveal. With all of her powers and bad-themed abilities, you'd think she would have this really creepy and animalistic appearance. But no, she's just a regular lady. It just kinda takes away from the villainous vibe she's supposed to have while she's on screen. The song she sings is alright. It's not exactly great, but it has a more consistent vibe and less embarrassing lyrics compared to other songs in the film. It shows off her quick energy and a creative display of her powers, just having fun with her cagey and mischievous personality. I also really like what they do with her character half the time, always concealing her in shadow to add a sense of mystery to her. It's really fun just seeing her hiding in plain sight while she trolls Maui and messes with Moana, right up until they decide to take her out of the shadows with that boring design. I honestly wish she was like that throughout the movie. She was so much more interesting while hiding in the dark, using her magic to overpower Maui. It made her feel more intimidating and dangerous as opposed to being a sidekick for another villain they never bothered to develop. Personality-wise, she's okay, I guess. She's a humorous snark, always trolling and messing around with the heroes while trying to act mysterious and hide her real motives. I really like how they play with the idea that she may have a crush on Maui, and even her pet bat is like, girl, really? The main problem comes from how, once again, they stuff this character into a movie that's just 3 dumbass stories lazily tied together because of how it was originally an ad for a failed TV show. It completely wastes Matangi's potential as a villain, instead focusing on this garbage attempt at making another cinematic universe for Disney to cash in on. It's a real shame because the introduction they gave her was a lot of fun. Spending the movie messing around with the heroes while cloaked in darkness, only for her to be a henchman for a shitty Thanos wannabe, the movie teases us with a good idea and just leaves it there. She is more entertaining than a lot of the other ones, but it doesn't exactly make her a good villain. Hopefully she teams up with Tamatoa and beats the shit out of Nalo to become the real villain of Moana 3. Hey, it would probably make for a better movie than whatever dogshit Disney plans on giving us.
Will you marry me?
I don't think so.
For a movie where Timon and Pumbaa are the main character over Simba, Shenzi, Banzai, and Ed are serviceable enough in The Lion King 1.5. The movie does a really good job with their personalities. All 3 of them feel familiar with how they acted and how they work off each other in the original, and as long as they're on screen, they do come across as pretty menacing. And unfortunately, that's the major problem. They're fun as long as they're on screen, but they're hardly on screen at all. They barely get 5 minutes of screen time throughout the entire film. The movie doesn't give them any proper spotlight, making them an extremely minimal part of the story. They only briefly interact with Timon and Pumbaa near the end, which ends up coming across as an afterthought. All except for this one bit that absolutely blew me away. I mean it. It ended up being so much funnier than I thought I should have found it. To stall for time while his mom and Uncle Max burrow a trap for the hyenas, Timon gets on his knees and asks Shenzi to marry him. It is just as stupid as it sounds, and yet somehow it is insanely funny. The facial expressions, the shocked reactions from the characters, the exchange between Timon and Shenzi, the dialogue surrounding this absolutely insane situation, even the way the score plays off the absurdity of the whole thing, it was comedy gold. And it more than makes up for the minimal screen time of the hyenas. It feels like a real exchange between the characters given their personalities, and the escalation of the joke is so good and definitely the highlight of the film. It does sour their position on this list that they're only in the movie for 5 minutes, but it's still a nice return to form for the trio. And that proposal is still a goldmine after all these years.
Sesame Street presents Follow That Bird.
Percival C. McLeach is a pretty serviceable villain for the movie he works with. At least he gets more time to work as a villain compared to Matangi and a lot of the other villains. He has a pretty cool design. This creepy, bony-looking guy with an evil cowboy aesthetic. I also have to commend George C. Scott for doing a fantastic job voicing this guy. Something about it just adds a lot of personality to him than he would normally have. This hazy snake-like tone that manages to reach all sorts of range to express different emotions in the character. And he's actually pretty menacing throughout the movie. He comes up with all sorts of elaborate plans to capture Marahute, even taking advantage of Cody's good nature and tricking him into leading him to the nest of eggs. But when you look past that, he's unfortunately a pretty by-the-numbers kind of villain. His motivation is just poaching animals to make money off them. Not as boring as Radcliffe, but it's still really mediocre for a villain motivation. His interactions with Joanna are pretty one-sided. All he really does is abuse her while making her chase people, and he doesn't have any standout quibs or moments of dialogue except maybe this one. Also, the way he's defeated is really embarrassing. Like, if your end goal is to kill Cody and make sure he doesn't escape and give give away the location of your secret lair, why don't you just shoot him? There was no reason for this convoluted plan to tie him to a rope over a river and feed him to crocodiles, because it would probably result in something like giving Bernard enough time to sabotage your vehicle, leaving you to put yourself in a vulnerable position where you have to stand over a cliff to shoot at the rope, where Bernard tricks Joanna into knocking you off the cliff into the river, leaving you to fight crocodiles and eventually fall to your death over the waterfall. But in spite of these setbacks, I will say McLeach is still fairly effective. He's a decent amount of menacing, clever, and entertaining mixed together. I guess it's a generous sign that it can only get better from here.
I'll have my revenge!
I feel like Shere Khan in The Jungle Book 2 is what Jafar from Aladdin 2 could have been like if they went all out with the idea of him becoming revenge crazy. A lot more ferocious and intimidating, even if the character doesn't feel all that different from his first appearance. You may not know this if you didn't see my ranking of the Disney live-action remakes, but I talked about my general problems with Shere Khan from the original movie. It tried to make him more mysterious and build anticipation for the final battle by having him only appear in small snippets before meeting Mowgli. But the problem comes from how disappointing he ended up being. He doesn't kill Baloo in spite of being a fully grown adult tiger constantly mauling at his face with his claws, and he's defeated in like 3 minutes of meeting Mowgli. Not only does he have virtually no relationship with the main character outside of just being prejudiced against man, but he ends up being a giant pushover with how much time the movie spent building him up. But here, he's a huge step up. For all the things Jungle Book 2 falters, Shere Khan is the one thing it manages to get down right. The movie takes advantage of its more detailed animation style to give us some very intimidating shots of him, concealing him in shadows while highlighting those deep yellow eyes as he stares at the viewer. And with him appearing throughout the film instead of just the last third, his presence feels much more apparent and dangerous. And they really did wonders in making him more menacing by having him revenge obsessed against Mowgli. It makes him more unsettling to be around because every time he's on screen, the only thing on his mind is murdering this kid, and he comes across as much more threatening during the final battle. Like he's not easily thwarted or distracted this time. He's a lot more aggressive and focused. I was actually impressed by how much of a step up this Shere Khan was compared to the original. He's creepier, more menacing, he has more presence in the story, and he's so well animated that it gives an extra flair to his screen time. One of the few times where the sequel outshined the original. The rest of the movie is trash though.
I wonder if that guy ever wiped his ass with the wrong hand.
Yes.
When it comes to the vast and expansive rogues gallery of Disney's villains, you can never go wrong with Captain Hook. He's one of the few villains who manages to perfectly capture that balance of threatening and funny. His chemistry with Peter Pan and Wendy was so fantastic, and the slapstick surrounding his bits with the crocodile are unforgettably hilarious. And although he's entertaining enough on his own, his rapport with Smee is very welcome. His iconic mix of menace and humor practically gave the original Peter Pan its identity, and it makes him one of the great Disney villains. And I'm happy to report that they made him just as entertaining in Return to Neverland. Maybe he's not allowed to be as clever and menacing as the original because of how he's working off of Jane, but honestly that's Jane's fault for hearing stories about his villainy and still thinking she can trust him. His beef with Peter is still very entertaining. Their sword fights have a lot of familiarity and experience to them, and the way they butt heads whenever they're together is so amusing. That shit-eating grin Hook gives to Peter every time he gets the upper hand pretty much says it all. He just gets so much glee from exacting his revenge on him. Even that small bit when he thinks he's actually succeeded is just funny. Like, he didn't think he was gonna get that far and is just flabbergasted by his accomplishment. He still has amazing facial expressions, he still has that hilarious chemistry with Smee, the slapstick still has a good pace to it, and although it's not as iconic as the crocodile, his bout with the octopus still has some good material. Also, it's implied that he may have killed the crocodile off screen, which is surprisingly dark, so there's that. The voice acting is still top-notch and adds to the humor of his dialogue, and he still has that amazing technicality where he does keep his word to not attack Peter in a certain way, and then twist it into his favor while not directly going back on his promise. They stay faithful to all the things that made him a fun villain in the original. The only downside is that he does come off as a rehash of the original character, and they don't give him any new growths or development like with Jafar. He's just after Peter like last time, and they don't really do anything to expand his motivations. Also, he doesn't open his performance with killing one of his crew. That was just such a fun bit and I wish they brought it back. I just feel like they could have done a bit more with him in this movie. Like give him more motivation than just wanting to get Peter. Like that bit with his mom could have been sincere and he was homesick in some way. Still, I can't say it's an unfaithful return to form for Hook as they do all the things that made him fun to watch the first time. He's still deranged, hilarious, and crazy as he was before. The rehash thing does hold him back from reaching his full potential and I do feel like they could have done more with him, but when you're already as entertaining as Captain Hook, I guess you don't need to change too much of a good thing.
I went to college!
I really didn't think this guy would rank as high as he did, but here we are. Bradley Uppercrust III doesn't feel like a villain that would normally work. He acts as the villain in a story that, given its basic premise, doesn't really need a villain. It could have just been about Goofy and Max struggling through college while trying to reconnect with each other. But Bradley manages to deliver by being so crazy and over the top in all the right ways. The design of this guy is fantastic. That comedically long chin adds so much to that shit-eating grin he puts on every time he messes with the heroes. And they gave him so many amazing expressions. Like, I am fully convinced that most of this movie's budget just went into animating this guy. And it's an absolute riot every time he appears. His eyes practically bulging out of his skull, the constant death glares, the sporadic body language, the way his teeth are always grinding together, even the way his hair frizzles while moving around. They just make him so much fun to watch. And they gave him such an entertaining personality to go with that animation. He has such a good variety of behaviors and mannerisms throughout the movie that make him even more unpredictable and hard to read, which allows his comedy to be more effective in catching you off guard. He's always acting so smug and trying to keep himself professional and reserved, when in reality he's a short-tempered loon who looks like he's on the verge of crashing out. The way he bosses his teammates around like they're soldiers in the Corps is so exaggerated but done in a way that feels fitting. Like he comes across as really commanding and doesn't want his authority to be challenged. And strangely enough, that's what leads to his downfall. His teammate could have won the race for him, but because he wanted to be in control and the center of the X Games, he ends up sabotaging him. But it doesn't feel like a villain defeat that diminishes his value like what happened with Ratcliffe and Jafar. His ego and arrogance are established to be core aspects of his character, and it fits naturally with the setting as he's a student in college. He put a lot of time and work into maintaining his position on campus and is desperate to keep that from being taken from him. For a loser attending college, he gets surprisingly diabolical and nefarious. He also has some really good chemistry with Max. No, not that kind. Their rivalry throughout the movie is very entertaining to watch because the writers come up with very good material for their conflicting personalities to work off of. And the way he subtly gets between him and his father is so slimy but amusing to watch. And his final defeat is really cathartic and funny. I won't spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it, but let's just say he really sent himself flying as a result of his own arrogance. I swear, Bradley alone is enough reason to watch an extremely goofy movie. It's a good movie on its own, but Bradley somehow makes it 10 times more fun to watch. From the moment he first appears to his big send-off, he is just a delightful treat. If more people who attended college were like him, it would be a lot less depressing.
Ever hear of the Midas touch?
Oh, cool dibs!
I was really on the fence as to where exactly to rank Saluk. He's a really entertaining villain, but I don't want it to feel misplaced. Like, is it really fair to say he's better than Bradley or Captain Hook? And after watching Aladdin 3 again, I figured, yes. Yes, it is. It's almost insulting how much more entertaining he is compared to Jafar. It shouldn't be possible, but they managed to pull it off. Obviously, he's not as good as Jafar from the original, but he's still a worthy close second. He has all sorts of fun with his villainy like a traditional Disney villain would, self-aware and enjoying every delicious second of it. And while he doesn't possess any superpowers like Jafar or several villains from the TV show, he still manages to be really threatening and menacing. The way he effortlessly overpowers Aladdin with his strength and ruthless combat style makes him a force to be reckoned with, even fighting off a bunch of sharks in the following scene with nary a scratch. He also has a really good dynamic with Aladdin and his father Kasim. You can tell that he was always trying to regain influence over the 40 Thieves since Kasim made himself their king, and he's been butting heads with him for years. And the arrival of his son only further places a dent in his plans. He ultimately wants the Hand of Midas, but he also wants control over the group, trying to impose his dominance over them to regain his status. And his song is also surprisingly catchy. It has a really energetic and loud tempo that fits his brutish personality perfectly. It also shows his cunning and how he's capable of persuading people to side with him, like he does with the palace guards. Of course, he's also a two-timing backstabber, willing to sell out his comrades to get revenge, which actually makes him even more dangerous when he's able to convince the surviving thieves that it was Kasim who sold them out. Saluk just hits so many check marks for being a good Disney villain, and for this to come from a sequel villain is nothing short of impressive. The only thing holding him back is how he's defeated. He knows the Hand of Midas turns everything it touches to gold, and he just blindly grabs it without using any sort of caution, and big shock, he ends up grabbing the bad side and turns into gold. You don't touch the Hand of Midas, dumbass. It's Hand of Midas 101.
That's my joke! I'll kill you!
It makes for an underwhelming villain defeat after the movie spends so much time building him up as this cunning and brutish threat. But even so, Saluk is such a good antagonist. Brutish, merciless, smart, cunning, charismatic, and having so much fun with how evil he is. Just like a Disney villain should.
Oh my god, could you leave me alone? You are the neediest kid!
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people think it's weird that I ranked Rano this high on the list, but there was something about him that really sparked my interest. On the surface level, there isn't that much to him. Just some kid who makes fun of Bambi while hitting on Feline. It's the usual school bully sort of thing. That is until they drop some interesting hints about who he grows up to be. For a movie about Bambi coping with the loss of his mom while reconnecting with his dad, Rano serves as a fairly interesting obstacle for him to overcome. He never outstays his screen time and never takes away from the main conflict while fitting in as a rival for Bambi to work off of. His ego is so through the roof with how he constantly brags about how awesome he is, which you'd think would get annoying, but the movie does it in a really satisfying way. Remember how I said earlier that it would have been more interesting if The Hunchback of Notre Dame 2 openly acknowledged how pathetic Sarouche was, with the writers and the other characters constantly taking shots at him? That's exactly what they do here, and it comes across as satisfying karma for his uptight behavior. He tries to impress the girl, she immediately dismisses him. He tries to tell interesting stories to boast about himself, the other characters just laugh at how ridiculous he is. He spends the entire movie acting smug and tough, but then he runs away when real danger shows up. Bambi makes an impressive jump, Rano is too scared to do it, and when he does, he ends up falling into the mud below. But in spite of his failings, he still manages to be a presentable rival to challenge Bambi as he comes of age. It is fun seeing him receive karma for his lousy behavior, but he also manages to be a fairly imposing figure against Bambi, using his bully tactics to intimidate him, which is pretty effective at some points. Bambi is still recovering from the loss of his mom, so he'd be more emotionally vulnerable, and Rano unintentionally taking advantage of that is gonna push him into a corner. It makes for an interesting piece of how he develops as a character, eventually going up above his bully and proving himself to be the better deer. Because of this, Rano manages to be a reasonably effective antagonist of Bambi's story, a presence throughout and challenging him in several ways. But you might still be wondering why I ranked him this high on the list. So far I haven't brought up anything that impressive about him. Well, what if I told you that Rano wasn't just some character that was made up for this movie? Turns out he's actually the grown-up deer that Bambi fought in the original for Feline. So their rivalry goes back a very long way, and Bambi 2 is partially about showing us how it started. It makes Rano come across as bitter knowing that he held on to that grudge for a very long time, and it's also a little tragic that he could have grown up to be more well-mannered if he was less full of himself. He was trying to make friends but was too egotistical in his methods, believing it was Bambi's fault for constantly showing him up. It's one of the rare instances in a Disney sequel where one of its elements is strengthened by context from the original movie, and I guess I'm not the only one who feels that way because he's actually a rather popular character for some reason. Knowing he becomes this hulking brute later on because of his inability to show humility to Bambi is a surprisingly interesting character study. Not only does it make his character more fleshed out in the original, but it makes for a good starting point on how he got that way throughout this movie. Rano might just be a bully at first, but he grows up to become something a lot more disturbed and intimidating. It's a really good character study, and a satisfying compilation of karma for him being a dick. It really shows how the tables turned on him, both in later years, and even back then as a stupid kid.
Why, you traitor!
What's this? A modern Disney twist villain that doesn't suck ass? It's downright witchcraft, I tell ya! Anyway, of the members of the Linksley family, I decided to go with Poppert as he's the most prominent antagonist in the movie, working as a double agent against Judy and Gary. The reason why most of these twist villains suck so much ass is because of how painfully obvious they make them, or how underdeveloped their characters are once they take off the mask. They did it with Bellwether, they did it with Hans, they did it with Screenslaver, and while they may not have done it with Callahan, they completely fail at making him sympathetic because of how vile and detestable he was in his indifference towards Tadashi's death. There's only one other twist villain that ever worked, Ernesto from Coco, but that's a different subject. Poppert is the second instance of the twist villain working because they succeeded in making him sympathetic and allowing his character to develop both before and after the reveal. There's usually this big dramatic shift in them when they reveal themselves, making them a completely different character from before, but Poppert remains consistent even after revealing his true intentions. It's different from Work from Atlantis, where the movie never does anything to hide the fact that he's a villain, and how the audience is clued in pretty early on about him having alternative motives. Throughout the story, Poppert behaves in a very obscure manner, so he manages to avoid any real suspicion. And even if you do feel skeptical about him while watching him, his actions when he shifts to full-on villainy are still really heavy and effective. It actually feels like his transformation into a villain was planned throughout most of the movie, so when he stabs Judy with the snake venom, it works narratively while also being shocking. It makes the twist more threatening because he was able to manipulate them the whole time without the audience or the characters being sure of it, and they make him sympathetic because his motivations are understandable. We see throughout the movie how he's abused by his family and simply wants to be accepted by them. He's noticeably reluctant about destroying the main patent because he recognizes the harm it would cause, but he's so desperate to be part of the family that he's willing to make that sacrifice. It's a situation where he could have been good but ended up being bad, but you don't resent him for the choice he makes, and he just has a really good personality to boot. His adorable awkwardness is a good mask for fooling Judy and Gary into believing he's a good guy, and his more intimidating demeanor after the reveal makes him feel threatening, until finally he has that full mental breakdown at the end. I still advise against Disney doing more twist villains because of how predictable and overused it's been for the last few years, but I will admit they did a great job making Poppert an exception. He's as villainous as he's awkward and silly, making him the perfect obstacle for Judy to overcome. And even if it doesn't make him the best sequel villain, he's still a lot better than that stupid sheep.
I'm just a sweet transvestite.
I don't know how, but somehow they did it. Disney walked up to Tim Curry, told him he would be voicing a talking pipe organ, got him to say yes, and in doing so managed to sell us one of the best villains in the entire Disney sequel universe, even being the best part of the movie, though that's not saying much since The Enchanted Christmas kinda sucks. While he's not as iconic as Gaston, Forte is such an entertaining, effective, and memorable villain, and he just gets better and better the further we get into the movie. Even his introduction is so alluring with him playing his haunting music in a dim candlelit room, setting a really grim mood for his performance and the rest of the film. His personality is so deliciously flamboyant, always acting sus and having it way past 11, and so much of it really just comes from Tim Curry voicing him. He just puts so much passion and flavor into this performance that it's impossible to resist. You really can't imagine any other person on Earth playing this character. It's like Robin Williams with the genie. Everything about him, from the design to the snarky drama queen way of behaving, perfectly fits with Tim's delivery. Even outside of Tim Curry's performance, they do all sorts of other things to make him fun. The CGI on him is notably a product of its time, but not to the point of being a full destruction, and it actually works as a visual representation of how he's different from everyone else in the castle. The other servants want to break the spell and regain their human form, while Forte would rather remain in his enchanted form, and they do take the time to address why he would want to remain enchanted. He's a musician at heart, so the thought of him being one with his instrument like that sounds like a sort of heaven to him. It gives him more motivation to prevent the spell from being broken beyond just wanting the beast to rely on him. The camera work also makes him a lot more menacing, and the pipe organ sting every time he says something villainous makes his dialogue more ominous. He really comes across as kinda scary when he does that. There's also a sense of tragedy to his character with how he became very attached to the beast over the years. Only finding salvation in being a pipe organ for his friend gets really sad when you think about how eerie his situation is. Unlike Gaston, who just wanted Belle out of pure desire, Forte became deeply codependent of his master, and after being neglected for all those years, his skill was suddenly being listened to and appreciated. When Beast walks out on him, he feels genuinely hurt, realizing that Belle's replaced him and he'll just be forgotten. And there's also the sense that their friendship was still genuine even if it came across as obsessive. It actually makes his downfall sorta sad. Even after everything that happened, Beast still thought of Forte as a friend, softly whispering his name as his remains lay waste on the castle grounds. Forte is such a fantastic treat, practically making watching the movie worth it just for his performance. He overshadows the entire thing with his natural charisma, even taking the time to develop him as a character. Maybe this Christmas I would recommend giving Beauty and the Beast: The Enchanted Christmas a watch, not because it's a good movie, but because Tim Curry as Forte is just too entertaining to pass up.
We're going back in time to the first
Cinderella.
to get
Cinderella.
off the menu.
When I talk about how a Disney sequel can bring back an old villain and expand on their character while still retaining the core of what made them great in the original, Lady Tremaine from Cinderella 3 is the gold standard of how to get that down perfectly. They managed to make her so much more devilish in ways that perfectly align with how she was characterized in the original. Bitter, jealous, spiteful, going to so many outrageous lengths to make Cinderella miserable, and she'll stop at nothing to get the last laugh, even if it means using her own children as a sacrificial pawn. On a surface level, it may diminish her intimidation factor that she relies on magic for her schemes. The original Lady Tremaine didn't need magic powers to be a great villain. She just needed to be a despicable wretch who took over Cinderella's life and made her miserable for her own amusement, making her a fantastic villain you love to hate and see receive karma. But thankfully, they don't do that with her. Although she tends to use the magic of the wand for her scheme, she still uses a lot of her demented wit and manipulation tactics to turn a situation in her favor. It makes her character tonally consistent with the original. Even with the wand at hand, she still uses her non-magic abilities to great effect, still capable of being a treacherous snake and posing a threat to Cinderella, seeing through her disguise, manipulating the prince and the palace guards, gaslighting Anastasia into a loveless marriage just so she can live a life of luxury. These are things that show how Lady Tremaine is still a threat not because of the wand, but because of the power she holds over Cinderella and her daughters. It's better that she doesn't constantly exploit the wand because it would take away from the natural menace she has by just being a slimy old lady, only using it as a last resort after she gets caught when Anastasia doesn't want to do the plan anymore. She goes completely off the rails this time and she doesn't stop for a single moment. She practically turns into a supervillain while remaining true to her roots. A dramatic ice-cold witch who revels in how twisted she is. It's so deliciously delightful, and her defeat is actually poetic with how she abused time travel. You can rewrite history as much as you want, but it won't change what actually happened, and your attempts to alter the past will eventually lead to your downfall. I am so happy with how perfectly they carried over Lady Tremaine into this movie. You'd think it would end in disaster by giving her a magic wand and making her travel through time, but they managed to find a fantastic middle ground around with her, using the wand as an effective plot point while expanding on her personality, making her even more enjoyably hateable and toxic. She knows exactly how to be an irredeemable piece of shit while being an entertaining character who works off the rest of the cast. Making her so revenge-driven on top of being this petty and spiteful was so entertaining, and it makes the movie 10 times better than it otherwise would have been. With all these things together, Lady Tremaine is without question a top-tier sequel villain, and coming up with one that can outmatch her would certainly be a challenge. And that's exactly what they did.
We could have been a good couple. We could have had something special. But you one crazy ass bitch.
We all know that Scar is a top-tier Disney villain, definitely top 5 material, but I always felt like there was one little thing holding him back. After killing Mufasa and stealing the throne, we don't get too much of him being an evil, menacing character. We do see the ecosystem being ravaged, but that's just him being a bad politician. We only see him acting like a lazy sloth, not taking his responsibility seriously while reprimanding Zazu and the hyenas. It's only at the end of the movie when we see him dooming the entire kingdom to starvation that we get to see him being this nasty guy who was built up during the first act. He's still an amazing villain, but I feel like he could have had a couple more scenes demonstrating his vile nature, and I'm not the only one who feels the same way, as I've seen a couple of other people making this same criticism. Well, someone behind The Lion King 2 must have heard about these criticisms, because holy shit, Zira is fucking fantastic. When you think of a Disney sequel villain, this is exactly the kind of material you want to see. Vicious, malice-filled, nefarious, foul-natured, threatening, psychotic, obsessed, deadly, and a voice that chills you to the bone with dialogue that's so raw and deeply disturbed. Her life has been torn asunder since Simba dethroned Scar, banished to a barren dry wasteland where she and her pride struggle for survival. Fueled by her love for Scar, she's only motivated by one thing: killing Simba and taking the kingdom in Scar's honor. This woman is so terrifying and devilish every second she's on screen, to the point I would say she leaves an even stronger impression than Scar. One of the first things she does is offer her son to Simba as a sacrifice. That is so deeply disturbed and fucked up, and it perfectly sets the tone for the rest of her time on screen. From that moment you know how sinister she is and how she'll stop at nothing to fulfill her goal. It's so sick how she indoctrinates this small child into growing up to be a vicious killer, whose only purpose in life is to kill Simba in retribution for Scar. All followed by this extremely grim and twisted song. Every lyric is just her relishing in her bloodlust and trying to pass it on to her son, and she sings it with so much raw conviction. That demented smile, those murderous eyes, that deep slithery voice, the way her anger escapes during several verses, and this is supposed to be a lullaby for Kovu to sleep to. It makes for a better villain song than Be Prepared because of how deeply rooted it is in Zira's desire for revenge. A lot more disturbed and intimidating than just Scar singing about wanting to take over the kingdom, and she only gets more demented and threatening after the time skip. We see how deeply effective her indoctrination of Kovu was, completely unrecognizable from who he was as a cub. After that, she waits in the shadows, waiting for her plan to unfold. The way she comes up with all these plans are incredibly nefarious and sinister, and it also shows her having an element of patience. She knows the time will come to spill Simba's blood. It's only a matter of waiting. That unquenchable bloodlust follows her every second she's on screen, and it really puts you on edge with how unrelenting she is. If anything, Zira probably doesn't even give a shit about the Pride Lands. She just wants to kill Simba, and she wants to kill him so badly she can taste it. It also results in her children inheriting her mental issues, from Nuka becoming obsessed with receiving her approval, to Kovu having a strong identity crisis after years of indoctrination. The movie does a really good job exploring the negative consequences of Zira's obsession, how it drove them to madness and feeling unloved by their mother. Killing Simba became the only thing she cared about, and her own kin have become disposable to that end. When she threatens to kill Watani for turning on her, it just feels so gut-wrenching. She would have done the same thing to Nuka if he survived and decided to turn on her too. It shows how her unrelenting hatred of Simba was both a strength and a weakness, because it fueled her to accomplish all these great feats while also blinding her to the world around her. It's what ultimately leads to her downfall, only thinking about her hatred of Simba until it consumed her completely. At the end of the movie, she's over a raging river, and Kiara offers her paw to help her up, and Zira's response is telling her to fuck off and just letting her fall to her death, all while giving that creepy smile before disappearing into the water. Zira was so consumed by madness and devoted to her hatred of Simba that she would rather die than be saved by someone from his pride. That is fucking metal for a Disney villain. Or at least that's what I would say if it wasn't a deleted scene. Yeah, they left in the creepy smile but cut out the dialogue and threw in a random scream, making it look like she just lost her grip. Isn't this the same company that made a scene where an old man was threatening to burn a young woman alive unless she became his sex slave, and they thought this was too dark to show kids? What an insulting ripoff to what otherwise would have been the absolutely perfect Disney sequel villain. For all my hatred of Disney remakes, I'm willing to make an exception, just to see this scene fully realized with the rest of the story. Oh, not live action, but with up-to-date 2D animation. Give us an HD remake of Simba's Pride that includes Zira's suicide, you cowards! Lastly, I have to say, though it's not shown directly, there's still a strong sense of tragedy to Zira's character. It's implied that she was manipulated by Scar's narcissism, and how she was a normal lioness before he took power. In a sense, you could argue that she's just another one of Scar's victims. She herself was indoctrinated by him, leading her to be his mate, and his death left her depressed. And after Simba banished those who were loyal to Scar, her mental health only deteriorated further. She never got the help she needed to free herself from Scar's manipulation, left to rot in a community that worshipped a dead dictator, and after years of struggling for survival, all that was left on her mind was the subject of her fall from grace, Simba. Zira is absolutely mind-blowing in how good she is as a villain of a Disney sequel, taking her lust for violence to so many extremes and making it a dark delight. She practically runs the entire gambit of what you can do with a villain. The tragic fall from grace, the bloodlust, the obsession with revenge, the hateful look in her eyes, that cold, slithery voice, her exquisite chemistry with the other characters, and her willingness to sacrifice her own kin to reach her goal. She is an apex S-tier villain, not just for these sequels, but for Disney in general. But alas, the top spot still eluded her. Because, well...
Art is violence, and I am a master.
If Lady Tremaine from Cinderella 3 is the gold standard for how a Disney sequel can expand on the villain of the original, then Cruella de Vil from 101 Dalmatians 2 is the platinum of how you do it. Like, oh my god. She is so thoroughly entertaining that she leaps entire bounds over her characterization from the original. She was already one of the greatest Disney villains, and they managed to make her even more insane and diabolical than before. She does still have a fascination for wearing furs, but this time she wants to make art out of the hides of the Dalmatian puppies. The way she describes it in such graphic yet enthusiastic detail is just jaw-droppingly devious. Like, holy shit, she was never this openly deranged in the original, and I absolutely love it. Not only do they stay faithful to who she was in the original, an insane, unsympathetic animal killer who acts like she's above the people around her, but they take these elements of her character and play them up through the roof. She is delightfully filled with malice and outgoing joy at the thought of taking revenge on the Dalmatian family, with so much personality and psychopathy oozing in every line of dialogue she has. Every single delivery and facial expression that comes from her is sugar-coated candy to the eyes and ears. It's completely impossible to resist how over-the-top and loony she gets the further you get into this movie. Those wide eyes popping out of her head, that devilish smile that practically stretches across her face, her skin-piercing glares, and all the emotion she spews out of her mouth. From anger to sadistic to excited to enthusiasm, even her more mundane and reserved emotions when negotiating with Lars. She's incredibly passionate and creative in how far she goes off the deep end in this movie, and you can tell that the voice actress was having a blast working with this script. The way she works off the other characters is also really fun to watch. Her past relationship with the Dalmatian family is already interesting enough on its own, and they further her dynamic with them by showing how headset she is in capturing them. Even her dynamic with Patch is so interesting because of how she butts heads with him, using him as a resource to round up the rest of the family, setting a trap for him to fall into, her malicious gloating as she congratulates him for helping her by throwing him in with the rest of the pups, and her growing frustration as she finds herself being outwitted by a seemingly helpless puppy. It's a really fun back and forth between them because of how she's a legitimate threat, but also because of how he manages to outwit her despite all the advantages she has over him. She also plays off Lars pretty well. The contrast between them is very well depicted, with him being an artist craving recognition, but also a voice of reason when Cruella gets murder happy. The calm exterior he has, combined with his temper towards animal cruelty, clashes really well with how she puts zero effort in masking her intention with the puppies. She actually thought that Lars would just go through with murdering them, no questions asked, with how immediate and straightforwardly she explains her plan. She's not even trying to be manipulative. She just wants to kill these dogs and is completely upfront about it. That is so fucked up but funny at the same time. It's an evolution to her character that makes complete sense. With the events of the original in mind, she would obviously be a lot more short-tempered and malicious towards the Dalmatians. Her reputation in the fashion world went down because of how they thwarted her schemes, but now she has a second wind to make art out of them, getting revenge and pursuing her passion both at the same time. She constantly catches you off guard, but in a positive way, making her incredibly unpredictable, and it also makes her psychotic moments more captivating. During the climax, when she's standing at the hood of the car reaching out for the Dalmatians, she grabs Rolly and says in such a sporadic way, "That's one! Just 98 more to go!" I feel like this one line of dialogue and how it's delivered perfectly encapsulates this entire performance. She says it like she's almost finished capturing the Dalmatians when she literally has 98 more to go. That is how deeply enthusiastic she is about killing these dogs. And the way her face lights up as she says it just shows how beyond any human reasoning she is in her mission. And the best part is how the movie finds a perfect balance in her presence. Never overstaying her welcome but never being too absent from the story. She has just the right amount of screen time between segments, making her a well-rounded threat to Patch and the rest of his family. And the danger feels more apparent because this time the grown-up dogs aren't there to bail them out. Patch needs to be quick on his feet to outwit her most of the time, only getting a little bit of help from Thunderbolt at the end. On a surface level you'd think this was just a rehash of the original character, but no, they actually made Cruella de Vil more menacing, more intimidating, funnier, more elaborate, more psychotic, expanding her motivations, deepening her rivalry with the Dalmatian family, just all around more batshit insane in every way that allows her to feel familiar with how she was in the original, while also furthering her as a character. I can see why other people would rank Sierra above her as she does come across as more complex and vicious in her bloodlust, but I'm sorry, Cruella de Vil was just so much more entertaining in comparison. An absolute riot with her deranged and deliciously despicable aura emitting in every single frame from her time in this movie. She never stops being entertaining for a single instant, and she delivers on every single expectation you would have as a fan of the first film. And for that, she is without question the absolute best Disney sequel villain. I have to say this was a really interesting video to work on, as it allowed me to talk about the Disney sequels while also being different about it. We've already made our feelings on these movies pretty clear over the years, but there was never a real direct discussion concerning the villains. Most of them suck. Like, they really suck. But I have to admit I was impressed with how many good ones there are. And not just how many, but the actual quality of these villains. These are villains that manage to be so entertaining and sinister, even ranking above most villains in the main movies. That's honestly a really impressive feat for these villains to achieve. You can tell there was legitimate passion for the good ones. Like they knew they didn't have to do much for a series of movies that were direct-to-home entertainment, but they did it anyway because they knew what people want in their Disney villains. Characters with so much raw and vigorous personalities while being entertaining foils for the heroes. They may not be as iconic as the top tier of Disney's rogues gallery, but they're still fun to watch and deserving of notoriety. With how set Disney is in making more theatrical sequels, we can only hope they at least give us a good villain, because in some cases, they can help salvage a movie with their performance even if the rest isn't up to snuff. And who knows, if Lady Luck decides to shine on us, perhaps we can look forward to seeing more entertaining and enjoyably despicable villain performances.